The fluorescent lights of the House Judiciary Committee hearing room hummed with a familiar low-grade tension on the afternoon of February 11, 2026. It was the kind of tension that preceded a routine oversight hearing, a polite procedural dance where questions were asked, answers were deflected, and everyone went home with their talking points unchallenged. But within the first hour, that hum would be drowned out by shouting, personal insults, and a moment of such raw personal fury that it would ricochet around the world, generating over 10 million views before the sun rose the next day. This is the story of how Attorney General Pam Bondi walked into a political firestorm over the Jeffrey Epstein files and left with her reputation in tatters, after a confrontation with Congresswoman Becca Balint exposed a nerve so raw it made the entire room gasp. To understand the explosion, one must first understand the kindling. For years, the name Jeffrey Epstein had been a curse on the American political and legal system. A wealthy financier with connections to presidents, princes, and billionaires, he had been accused of sexually abusing dozens of underage girls for decades. His mysterious 2019 death in a Manhattan jail cell, ruled a suicide, had only deepened the suspicion of a massive cover-up reaching into the highest echelons of power. For his supporters and much of the public, Donald Trump had run on a promise of disruption, a vow to drain the swamp. A central promise of his 2024 campaign had been the full, unredacted release of all government files related to Epstein, finally giving the public the truth they had been denied. Pam Bondi, the former Attorney General of Florida and a longtime Trump loyalist, was tasked with delivering on that promise. Her confirmation had been met with skepticism from Democrats, who remembered her time in Florida and her close ties to the Trump orbit. Now, seated at the witness table, her posture rigid and her jaw set, she was there to defend the Justice Department's handling of those files. Behind her, in the front rows of the audience, sat a silent, powerful jury, a group of a dozen women, survivors of Epstein's abuse, their faces a mixture of hope, anger, and sorrow. They had waited years for accountability. The first hour was a grinding, partisan affair. Republicans on the committee used their time to praise Bondi and the Trump administration's focus on violent crime and border security. They displayed charts showing falling crime rates and praised the Backing the Blue agenda. But when the Democrats took their turns, the atmosphere shifted. They weren't interested in crime statistics, they were interested in the redactions. Representative Pramila Jayapal, DWA, was the first to light a match. Her voice calm but laced with steel, she addressed the elephant in the room, the survivors. Jayapal pointed out that in the Justice Department's rush to release files, they had failed to properly redact documents, leading to the re-victimization of the women Epstein had abused. She asked the survivors in the room to stand if the Justice Department had not yet met with them to discuss their cases under the new administration. One by one, every single woman rose to their feet. It was a devastating visual, a silent indictment of Bondi's promises. Jayapal then turned to Bondi. "I would ask you, Attorney General Bondi, would you like to turn around and apologize to these survivors?" The room held its breath. This was a moment for grace, for humanity. Bondi looked at Jayapal, her expression hardening into a mask of contempt. "I'm not going to get in the gutter with this woman," she snapped, dismissing the request as theatrics. A ripple of disbelief went through the audience. The survivors, who had stood hoping for acknowledgement, slowly sat back down, their faces falling. Later, one of them, Marina Lacerda, would tell reporters that Bondi had dehumanized us today. She felt the Attorney General had turned a moment of profound pain into a political circus. This was the strategy that political commentator Bill O'Reilly would later identify on News Nation. Bondi had decided to throw some hand grenades. She wasn't there to answer questions, she was there to blow up the process, to attack the questioners so fiercely that the substance of their questions would be forgotten in the resulting chaos.
When the ranking member, Jamie Raskin, a former constitutional law professor, tried to interject with a point of order, Bondi swiveled in her chair, pointed a finger at him, and unleashed a line that would become an instant meme. "You are a washed-up loser lawyer." The insult was so bizarrely personal, so out of place in a congressional hearing, that it hung in the air like smoke. Chairman Jim Jordan banged his gavel, calling for order, but the damage was done. The veneer of civility had been shattered. Body language experts watching the footage later noted the shift. They pointed to Bondi's use of her pen as a symbolic weapon, jabbing it towards her critics. Her finger-pointing was not just emphatic, it was aggressive, an evolutionary trigger that signaled threat rather than debate. They argued it was a performative act of anger, a choice made to dominate the room rather than engage it. But all of this was merely the prelude. The main event, the moment that would define the hearing and generate millions of views, was still to come.
It was the turn of Representative Becca Balint, DVT. A progressive Democrat from a small state, Balint was not just any member of Congress. She was a woman of deep personal history, a lesbian whose political fire came from a place of profound ancestral pain. Her grandfather had perished in the Mauthausen concentration camp during the Holocaust. This history was not a footnote in her biography. It was the lens through which she viewed power, authoritarianism, and the dangers of silence. Balint began her line of questioning calmly enough, focusing on a specific name, Howard Lutnick, Trump's nominee for Commerce Secretary. Lutnick, a wealthy financier, had acknowledged visiting Epstein's island, a fact that had raised eyebrows given the administration's stated goal of transparency. Was the president aware of Secretary Lutnick's ties to Epstein when he chose him to lead the Department of Commerce? Balint asked. Bondi, instead of answering, pivoted. She launched into a prepared talking point about a Border Patrol agent, a tactic of deflection she had used all day. Balint, seeing her time being wasted on non-answers, tried to cut through the noise. "Okay, so I'm going to conclude that the president, in fact, did know about his ties," she began. "Shame on you," Bondi shouted, her voice cutting through Balint's like a knife. Balint blinked, surprised by the sudden escalation. "Oh, for goodness sake, this is pathetic," she shot back, her voice rising to match the Attorney General's. "This is not a game, Secretary." When Bondi corrected her title, "I'm Attorney General," Balint delivered a stinging retort that drew murmurs from the Democratic side. "My apologies, I couldn't tell." It was a witty line, a sharp jab at Bondi's performance. But it was also the opening Bondi was waiting for. She leaned into her microphone, her voice dripping with a calculated condescension. She asked Balint if she had ever pressed Bill Clinton or Merrick Garland about Epstein. Balint dismissed the question as weak sauce. But Bondi wasn't finished. She had saved her most potent, most toxic weapon for last. Looking directly at the lesbian congresswoman whose family had been murdered by the ultimate expression of state-sponsored hatred, Bondi said, "And also, I want the record to reflect that with this anti-Semitic culture right now, she voted against a resolution condemning From the River to the Sea." Time seemed to stop. The reference was to a 2024 House resolution that condemned the phrase, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," a phrase many Jewish groups consider anti-Semitic. Balint, along with dozens of other Democrats, had voted against it, arguing that it was a broad brush used to stifle legitimate political speech and demonize Palestinians. It was a complex, nuanced vote on a highly contentious issue. But in that room, in that moment, there was no nuance. Bondi had just stood before a Jewish woman whose grandfather was murdered in the Holocaust and implied that she was complicit in an anti-Semitic culture. The accusation landed not just as a political attack, but as a profound, personal desecration. Balint erupted. She leaned forward, her face flushed with a fury that transcended standard political anger.
It was the rage of a descendant of survivors being told she was a bystander to hate. "Oh, do you want to go there, Attorney General? Do you want to go there?" she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "Are you serious?" The room became a chaos of shouting. Chairman Jordan's gavel banged uselessly against the wood. Other members shouted over each other. But Balint was not finished. She looked Bondi dead in the eye, her voice carrying over the din with a chilling clarity. Talking about anti-Semitism to a woman who lost her grandfather in the Holocaust. Really? Really? And then, with a final disgusted shake of her head, she turned, grabbed her things, and walked out of the hearing room. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed louder than all the shouting. The camera, a hungry beast in modern politics, stayed on Bondi, and there it captured the image that would seal the viral fate of the hearing. As Balint stormed out, as the weight of her words hung in the air, Pam Bondi broke into a wide, unmistakable grin. She started to giggle. She leaned over to her aide, whispering and laughing, as if she had just pulled off a brilliant prank.
The juxtaposition was nuclear. Balint's righteous, pained fury against Bondi's smirking schoolyard dismissal. In an instant, the complex politics of the Epstein files were reframed. It was no longer about documents and redactions. It was about cruelty. It was about a woman in power laughing at the ancestral pain of another woman. The internet did the rest. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were uploaded to X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube. The first uploads, grainy cell phone recordings of C-SPAN feeds, garnered thousands of views in minutes. By evening, professionally clipped versions with captions were circulating. The headline, "Pam Bondi panics after Rep. Balint exposes her in explosive hearing," began trending, attached to dozens of different videos. The word panics was a slight misnomer in the literal sense. Bondi hadn't looked panicked, she had looked smug. But it captured the essence of a narrative that was rapidly forming. Bondi had been caught. Her strategy of aggression had backfired catastrophically. By attacking Balint's heritage, she had exposed herself as someone willing to say or do anything to avoid answering for the Epstein mess. As night fell on the East Coast, the reaction videos began. Legal experts on TikTok broke down why Bondi's behavior was unprecedented for an attorney general. Body language experts on YouTube dissected her predatory smile. Commentators from across the political spectrum weighed in. Even conservative commentator Bill O'Reilly, while sympathetic to Bondi's intent, admitted the handling of the files and the hearing wasn't being run responsibly. But the most damaging critiques came from the survivors. In interviews, Marina Lacerda didn't just criticize Bondi's policies, she mocked her performance. "She has become a circus act at this point," Lacerda told News Nation, adding that the whole room was laughing at her, a far cry from the fear and respect Bondi had tried to command. Meanwhile, the memes were minted. Bondi's washed-up loser lawyer quote was set to music. Her giggling fit was turned into a looping gif forever associated with Balint's exit. By midnight, the major news networks had recut their evening broadcasts to lead with the clash. The BBC ran a live page with updates, highlighting the fiery testimony. The Times of India, picking up on the global interest, ran the video with the headline that perfectly captured the drama. The story had transcended politics. It had become a piece of high drama, a clash of personalities so raw it was irresistible. The morning shows on February 12th were dominated by the moment. On MSNBC's Morning Joe, the panel played the clip in slow motion, analyzing every micro-expression. On Fox News, the hosts tried a different tact, defending Bondi by focusing on Balint's vote against the resolution, arguing that the question was legitimate. But the defense felt weak against the visual evidence of Bondi's laughter.
Polling from CNN, cited in the aftermath, reminded viewers that only 6% of Americans were satisfied with the handling of the Epstein files, a bipartisan disgust that Bondi's performance had done nothing to alleviate. The millions of views were not just about clicks, they were about a story that wrote itself. Here was the most powerful law enforcement officer in the country, a woman tasked with upholding justice, refusing to apologize to victims and giggling while invoking the Holocaust against a critic. The narrative had a clear villain and a clear hero. Balint, in her walkout, became a symbol of righteous resistance. Her words, talking about anti-Semitism to a woman who lost her grandfather in the Holocaust, became a rallying cry shared by Jewish advocacy groups and progressive activists alike. LGBTQ Nation ran the story with a headline that emphasized Bondi's laughter, tying it to a broader pattern of behavior they saw as emblematic of an administration that thrived on cruelty. The Huffington Post, rather than focusing on the politics, drilled down on the psychology, featuring experts who dissected Bondi's damning behavior. The verdict was unanimous. It was a performance of aggression designed to mask a lack of substance. As the sun set on the day after the hearing, the numbers came in. Across all platforms, YouTube, X, TikTok, Facebook, the combined views for videos related to the Bondi-Balint clash had surpassed 10 million. The headline was a sensation. Pam Bondi panics after Rep. Balint exposes her in explosive hearing. It was a simplification of a complex event, but like all good headlines, it contained a kernel of truth. Balint had exposed something. She had exposed the fact that beneath Bondi's bravado, there was no plan, no answers, and no empathy. When pushed on a question that mattered, a question about the humanity of her accuser, Bondi had reached for the lowest tool in the box and shattered it. In the days that followed, the political fallout continued to ripple. Democrats called for an investigation into Bondi's conduct and a special counsel for the Epstein files. The White House, in a brief press gaggle, reiterated its full support for the Attorney General, praising her for not backing down from far-left attacks. But the damage to Bondi's public image was done. She was no longer just the Attorney General. She was the woman who laughed at the Holocaust survivor's granddaughter. She was the woman who called a constitutional scholar a washed-up loser. She was the personification of a government that seemed more interested in fighting than in functioning. And, in the quiet of her district office, Becca Balint released a short statement. She didn't dwell on the insult or the laughter. She simply thanked her constituents for their support and reaffirmed her commitment to holding this administration accountable no matter how low they go. She didn't need to say more. The video, now with 10 million views and counting, said it all. It was a testament to the power of a single moment in the digital age, a moment where the mask slipped, the truth peeked through, and the world was watching.